There's been a recent surge of games that have a Game Boy Color aesthetic. It's been really fun to see. For someone like myself who played the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color as a kid, I do have a lot of nostalgia for that style. There's something about having constraints that can really bring out creativity. So let's take a look at this first one, which is by the makers of Shovel Knight. Yacht Club Games announced Mina the Hollower a while back, and after having played the demo, I can confirm that this game is pretty awesome. On top of having that sort of Game Boy Color aesthetic, it has some great visuals to look at and some great gameplay. Once you get used to the movement, you'll find out that there are all sorts of neat tricks you can do to take out the enemies. If you enjoyed games like Link's Awakening, you'll feel right at home here. You start the game choosing from a few different weapon types, and you'll stick with that throughout the game. And as you move forward, you'll get various new items that have different effects called trinkets. Those can upgrade your abilities, give you higher attack power, or even do things like extend your time in the air, allowing you to jump further. You can also dive underneath the ground and pop up and do all of these different movement skills, so it's very cool. It also helps that it has a really great soundtrack, much like their first game, Shovel Knight. This is a really well put together game by a proven studio, so I feel pretty good about recommending it to anyone that is interested. You can play Mina the Hollower on all modern consoles and on PC. 8-Bit Adventures 2 harkens back to the good old days of Final Fantasy when it was all about punching monsters and flying airships. This is a game that hits all of the check marks of an RPG that looks like something from the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance era. Inspirations for the game came from Chrono Trigger and Mother 3, after all, so that's a high mark to be referencing. Considering that this game managed an 87 on Metacritic, I think it's safe to say it did a pretty good job. It doesn't play things overly safe, but I would say that this is more of an iteration than it is a revolution. Sometimes that's really all I want, and something that we don't always get. It combines the 8-bit aesthetic with the kind of party banter that you really want from a modern era JRPG. Characters that feel central to the story with their own dynamics and reasons for doing things, and don't worry about it being the second game in the series. This is a perfectly good jumping on point that doesn't require any knowledge of the previous game. So you can play 8-Bit Adventures 2 on all modern consoles and on PC. And this next one is interesting in that it was specifically developed for the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. So you can actually get a cart and pop it into your Game Boy, or you can buy it and play it on an emulator. Last Crown Warriors is what the devs call an action tactics game where you take on waves of enemies and try to conquer all the bases. You have different heroes that all have their own weapons and different stages with both enemies and hazards to get through, and of course a boss at the end of the road to take down. It's kind of an interesting idea. Definitely feels much more like a Game Boy game because it was literally developed to be that from the ground up. You can buy the game through itch.io, but it is currently not released yet. They do have a demo and early access for those who'd like to give it a try. And the next one is a bit of a 2-for-1 special, and I'm talking about Disc Creatures and its upcoming sequel, Disc Creatures World. We've got a bit of a Game Boy Color into Game Boy Advance situation going here with these two games. The first game, Disc Creatures, is a very Pokemon-like game inspired by the creature collecting games of the Game Boy era, with a little bit of that Shin Megami Tensei goodness stuck in there as well. Collecting and fighting with creatures is all about focusing on building up your team, and you do that by combining your creatures through fusion to create new ones. So it has systems that are a little bit like both of those games mashed into their own new thing. Disc Creatures World, much like the original Disc Creatures, features 3-on-3 combat, so it's not just a 1v1 thing like in Pokemon. It's also a jump up in production levels and style, and where the first game gives you around 200 creatures, in Disc Creatures World, you can now get up to 300. Both of the games are on Steam, with the original Disc Creatures being available right now, and the sequel coming out sometime in 2026. Tearscape just released in February 2026 to a relatively solid reception. This game is a bit of a Metroidvania with a top-down perspective similar to Zelda games of old. It has a fantastic chiptune style soundtrack and definitely gives me those Game Boy nostalgia vibes. The combat is pretty quick-paced as well, so you'll have to be on your toes, master the art of the dodge, and then strike. Of course, you do have tools and abilities that you'll be unlocking over the course of your game to switch things up and add a bit more depth to your experiences. And this game, much like many Metroidvanias, is all about exploration, so you have to find your way through all sorts of different spaces and even uncover hidden passages. You won't be completely alone. There are a variety of different NPCs that you can run into who add a bit of life to the world and serve as a good way to learn about it. You can play Tearscape right now on PC. The last game I'd like to showcase here is Ratcheteer DX. It's a game that was originally for a system called the Playdate. It was a handheld system for indie games that had a crank for some reason, and now that game has been updated and brought elsewhere, including to the PC. Ratcheteer DX is a bit like Zelda, and it features 250 different rooms in 6 regions and 6 dungeons. You'll be given a variety of different tools and ways to fight the enemies. You can even play it in that classic original Game Boy Color set, or a few other color sets that are more like Game Boy Color or something a bit more modern. Ratcheteer DX has a full demo, so if you'd like to give the game a try before you commit to buying it, you can feel free to do so. It's very Game Boy retro-coded, not just in look but also in the feel and the gameplay, so if you're craving that Game Boy style, make sure to give this one a try. You can play it on Nintendo Switch or on PC. So there you go, there are 6 different games with that Game Boy Color style, and a few different genres even, so hopefully you found something interesting there. These are definitely not the only games with this style, so make sure to bring up others that you know about in the comments for other people to find, and maybe I'll cover some more myself sometime soon. And for more game suggestions and videos about RPGs of all kinds, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.